Free advertising. Hello, fellow Sublime Text Fanatics. OdatNurd here with weird computer problems. You ever had one of those situations where you're attempting to navigate in a web page and then suddenly your mouse stops moving and nothing responds, and the only thing you can do is hard power off and then power on again and then wait for FSIC to sync up your drives? And then you check the kernel logs and it doesn't look like anything untoward happened? Yeah, that's not worrying at all. Welcome to the stream, the last stream of March, if I had to guess, because coming up tomorrow, April 1st. April 1st is the first day, as a matter of fact, that I started uploading videos to my other channel, which I think I just inadvertently advertised a second ago. In a weekly series, and starting next Monday, we're going to be doing video series. I'm calling it Plugin Dev 101, where we're going to learn all about the sorts of things that we kind of take for granted here in the live streams, unless someone asks the question, what's a view, what's a window, how do all of these parts fit together? And once we have a basis of understanding all of the key parts, then we can start jumping off into another series of videos where we cover things like we do in the live stream, but in a more dedicated fashion. Something along the lines of um, having examples of plugins and working through them, or going over an existing plugin and how it works, and all those regular plugin development questions we get, including one that happened on the forum just earlier this evening, where it would be nice to have a video series that was, dedicated to, hey, someone asked this question. What's the answer to this question? Let's walk through it. But that sort of thing can be hard to do without a common base to draw on. And if was one thing that I've been trying to do in my video series is on the other channel, it's tried to gather up all of the common questions that I've seen people have and arrange them in sort of a logical progression of, now when we get to this point and talking about, say, for example, the go to anything, we need to know a little bit about projects, but we've covered that in a previous video. And before you can know about projects, one of the things you might want to know about is how to configure Sublime, because one of the things you can do is project specific configurations. We have to cover that first, and so on down the line. So it's hopefully that's going to be quite exciting. And the stream health seems to be okay. That's good. Pardon this while I scratch my ear. Health-wise, I seem to be doing okay, except it seems like I'm kind of getting an ear infection in this ear. Knock wood that it's nothing related to anything, because it's probably going to be tricky to get anything to happen with that. And I need to swap this over to this kind of action so that we can get ready to do some stuff here. Hang on just a tick, and that is, I think, the thing that we want. Yeah, that looks like the thing that we want. So let's say we go ahead and jump into the stream proper, and then we can go from there with what the plan is for the evening. Is it surreptitious the way I sort of lose my eyes to look over at that monitor there? I'm going to switch this thing out of studio mode. I bet you it probably did something unfortunate there, didn't it? Let's watch the live playback. That seemed to have been okay. Rock the Casbah. Anyway, there's a couple of things that we would like to do here, and the first thing is related to this. A new build came out just a little while ago, and I haven't had a chance to do anything but download it because that aforementioned weird computer problem thing, which actually happened yesterday too. So it's a good thing I have a replacement computer back there. I think I made something very angry indeed. But I think should we want to do that? Yeah, let's go ahead and do that first. There's one other bit of housekeeping to take care of as well. I probably could have done that directly inside of that thing, but if we go to Sublime Text, and then I can move, excuse me, Sublime Text build 40. Geez, what build is it that just came out? 70, I guess. That sounds about right. .zip to here. Oh, to Windows, excuse me. I'm a wee bit of a data hoarder, and there's going to be also a that to this. If you wondered how many builds of Sublime Text that there's been since the very first build for Sublime Text 3 came out. It's this many. Um, this is all of the public ones anyway. I neglected to capture all of these Sublime Text 2 versions because around the time I started using Sublime Text 3, Sublime Text 2 was already on the way out. But with this all set aside here, I can go to here and Sublime Text. I actually have a script set up to automatically download and install things, but these builds don't live in the same place and they have a different file name, so I haven't actually fixed it. Sublime Text build 37. What was it? 70, I believe, was the one that I thought it was. Oops. My bad. And that was 70, right? So we want to move Sublime Text to Sublime Text 4070. I've already forgotten. I'm terrible with that sort of thing. Then we can move Sublime Text 4070 over to the local directory and do this. Right on, right on. Let's see if I did it correctly. Yep. Jiggity jig. Cool beans. All right, so that part's all done. We can go ahead and close that up. So we can take this bad boy for a drive. I like to keep, as we saw, every public version of Sublime. These technically aren't Sublime Text 3 builds, but they're just Sublime Text builds, so that still applies. And my local directory has, all of them set up. So if you ever, wondering when you're doing something plugin related and something doesn't seem to work right, and you think that it's a bug, one of the nice things to do is go back in time, try an earlier build, see if it was fixed there, try to narrow down exactly what build this thing might have gone horribly wrong in. One of those ways you can create a more useful, bug report. Now, with that out of the way, one other thing that I would like to do, I probably don't need to keep this because it's a forum post, so we'll go ahead and delete that. Whoops, that is not the key that I meant to press. Pardon me, I meant to press that one. That's notes for what we're going to be doing in just a second. And we don't need that either, but we'll leave that there, I think. It's probably going to be okay. Actually, what we probably need to do is create a new window. Go into the HyperHelp project. If you'll recall, last stream before that, we worked on the command that would position a certain point in the file where the cursor is, for example, at the top of the window. For use here in the HyperHelp focus command, this is the command that gets executed when you follow a link or otherwise navigate between anchors. And we can see here it is focusing this thing into the center of the window because that's what show at center does. And show at position, it or show with a position but not show at center, more or less make sure that this is visible, especially if you pass in true for show surrounds, and more or less tends to do something similar to show at center. But what we'd like to do here in the streams, because my big fat head's over here in the corner and I consistently forget that and then interact with stuff down here, particularly when I pop help up, it goes into the middle of the window that tends to go behind my head. And in the upcoming package development course, when we get to the part where we're actually looking at API things, we're going to be using Snappy to do that. I'd like to have the help actually focus at the top of the window instead of the middle of the window. So we came up with a set of code to be able to do that. And then the next stream after that, I thought I'm going to go ahead and throw this in here to get it working. And what did I do? I added this code. It didn't have the print at the time. And we'll go ahead and do that, which figures out this magic information. Now, if you haven't actually seen that particular stream, here's an example of what we were doing here. We ask The current position you're going to get is either going to be an integer point somewhere in the buffer, like 12 for the 12th character, or it's going to be a list, which is a beginning and an end, which is a region that spans, like this or this, which are both the same thing, but where the cursor is determines the order of the two items in there. And whichever way you get it, this is turning it into a region. The region constructor, if you give it one integer value, creates a region that starts and ends at the same place. Otherwise, it starts at the first position and ends at the second position. Now, this is necessary because arguments to Sublime text commands have to be transmitted from the plugin host to Sublime to be able to fetch information on them and do various things. And the core of Sublime is not inside of the plugin host. So in order to marshal these values and ship them back and forth across the shared memory segment that is used for this, at least on Linux versions of Sublime Text, the list of types of arguments is constrained to standard types. You can't pass an argument of a custom class. Sublime doesn't know how to handle those. You get an error. It can only do things like integers, numbers, booleans, lists, arrays, things that lists, arrays are the same thing. Lists and dictionaries, pardon me. So in order to pass a region to this command, we have to pass it as a list, as an array of two values if we want it to be passed that way, and then turn it back into a region. And here, whether it's a single point or 2 points, we convert it into a region, so the rest of the code does something. And then we can determine the beginning position, which is always the leftmost point of a region. A region has a specific begin point and an end point. The end is the end where the cursor is. So this is a left to right region, starting at this point and going to this point. And the same thing could be done this way, which still spans the same characters, but now it starts here and ends here. And uh, the A and B values are the first point and the second point, but the begin always gives you the lowest number of those where it begins in the buffer, not where the region begins. If you want to know where the region begins, always use A. If you want to know where the region ends, always use B, where end represents the cursor location. If you just want to know which one's closer to the beginning of the file or closest to the end of the file, which you often want to do, particularly in cases like this, you can use the begin method. So take that position, get the begin method, ask Sublime to turn that into a tuple of row and column, which turns something like 1045 as a point in the buffer represented in characters into line 28 or line 208, column 14 or whatever. The first item is row. We take that value, multiply it by how big a line is in device independent pixels in this particular view, which is a function of the font size that's currently in use, and then set the viewports to start at the X position 0, so it's flush left, and at that point. And once I did all of this, I saved that up, and then I quit, and then I restarted Sublime. And then I expected that when I followed a link, it would jump to the top, but it didn't. And I put that doing a thing in there to see, is this command actually being executed? And it's not. When I run this, nothing is being logged there. And I wasn't sure why that was the case. I doubted that I even knew how my own package worked. But it turns out I did, but not in the way that I would have thought, because this commands file here, if I was to do reveal in sidebar, is in HyperHelp core HyperHelp. Now, HyperHelp core is the dependency. This HyperHelp directory inside of it represents an actual package, and HyperHelp extracts this into the packages folder as, or actually as a Sublime package file to actually install HyperHelp. And it doesn't do that all the time. It only does it when it thinks the version changed. So the fact that I changed this here doesn't matter because that's not the version that's actually being used for anything. What I actually have to do is push the right sequence of keys and say HyperHelp dev mode force bootstrap. And before I do that, I'm even going to go here and clear up the old console.ru. So when I click it, we can say this. This will execute a bootstrap and replace the existing HyperHelp system package with a newly generated one. Yeah, that's what I want to do. I don't trust myself. And now look, it's being updated, so I'm going to have to restart Sublime. And we can see some actual information here. What happened? It added HyperHelp, the package it was about to extract, to the ignored packages file, which makes Sublime unload everything. And it also reloaded these because the package versions of them are gone, and my versions of them in my user package remain. Then it had to regenerate syntax summaries because the syntax was gone, and the meta information that's in there for symbols, which allows you to do things like navigate to, you know, bits and bobs in your help file. Then it did the bootstrap, where we can see it here. It's bootstrapping this to the installed packages, and then it unignores the package, and everything's all done. Now all we have to do now is quit Sublime one more time and restart it. Now if we check down here, we'll see a message that says something like, I don't know exactly where it happened. It said doing a thing because it did a navigation there. So it's doing a thing. And specifically, what it's doing is, it displayed the help there. It might not be doing the right thing, but it's definitely doing something. So that's the reason why that code wasn't working previously. And there should be somewhere around here a list of things. What says, I guess that's it. Loading all the plugins. Plugins loaded. Load some help. Oh, look, the sample help file is broken. But here we can see my package warning me, but I know the secret setting to stop it from complaining, and it's up to date, so it doesn't need to do anything. So now in theory, these things, when you navigate to them, jump to the top of the file, which is exactly what we would like to have happen. Awesome sauce. Okay. Now, if I went back to here, that is jumping to the top of the file. That's nice. That is way cool. And now, well, I guess probably that one wasn't a good example because opening it in a web page is unlikely to help anybody. We can jump to, oh, I know what I meant to do that and not that. Excuse me. And it even seems to work if the file is shorter than the whole file. So that's nice. That probably requires scroll past end to be a thing or something. But in any case, that is all good. So for our purposes, I'm going to save that and then, wish I stopped doing that. Force another bootstrap, like so. And then quit and restart one more time. Just so that my console isn't filled up with messages that say, doing a thing. I know what you're doing. It's interesting that, that may have, well, okay, this part should actually be commented out, but we won't worry about that here. I'll go ahead and comment that part out for now and force another bootstrap, and then we won't worry about restarting. But the curiousness of why navigating to that didn't seem to do anything directly might be because that command wasn't available yet. But once I've set the viewport position to something, it should be trying to fiddle the viewport around. That's probably not something what we want, but that's nothing we need to worry about here. Okay, so we can go ahead and close that window, and we're back over here. Now, the actual thing we're going to be trying to work on in this particular live stream is something that Keith from the Discord suggested as a possible plugin topic, and it seemed interesting, and it's more or less completely out of my bailiwick because I'm not a web developer. Which is why I had some notes up just to get myself going. But the idea is that it would be nice to do a couple of different things. I think the thing he mostly wanted was the idea of if you had a web page that had a data URI that represented an image and you hovered the mouse over it, that it could show a hover pop-up of what that image looks like, which may or may not actually exist as a package. I haven't actually checked. I don't think that was, you know, I think it was in the Discord just recently. I mentioned how when there's something that I'm interested in doing in Sublime, I don't tend to go to package control to see if there's another package I could install that does it. I just tend to play and build the thing myself. And even if I do it like we do in the live streams here, we do it as proof of concepts. Is this a thing that we could do? Yes. Okay. So good. Did you learn how to do things that way? But the other thing that is interesting about this is the idea of actually looking at an image and being able to convert it into um, data URI. And we're going to investigate if that's possible as well. And because it's the easiest way to preview data URI is to actually have one first, that seems like, you know, a nice way to go with that. So there's something we're going to do here. We'll go to the packages folder. What might we call a package that does something like this? Oops, sorry, flux capacitor. Something like data URI tool. Yeah, that sounds nice. And then we'll go ahead and throw that into the window. And we'll touch data URI tool. We'll go and touch, let's see, data tool.py, just to have a file in there. We can go ahead and close that out. It seems to have been loaded. Oh, right. What we're going to do here is also save as this file as .python version and put 3.8 into it. And then we will close that, go back to data tool, and hello, Ashwin. Set ourselves up to be a plugin. You know what? I'm going to do this because I am lazy. Close that without saving. Yeah. Paste that in. Cool. I guess we do want a command. We want it to be a text command. We'll call it create data URI. Oh, I won't say command. That would be silly. And we're going to say we want this to be a window command. How's life been treating you today, Ashwin? I had more than my fair share of telephone calls with people about problems I didn't want to solve and actually can't because I'm not the network guy. So it's kind of nice to be away doing something fun, creating a thing in a place. If you missed the first part of the stream, I figured out, well, not during the stream, but previously, why that thing we were trying to do where help topics focus at the top of the window instead of the middle. I realized after I did that, later that night, often when there's a horrible problem or something that I can't figure out what the problem is, shortly after the stream is over, it immediately just kicks in my head. I'm like walking back to, turn off the after I finish turning off the lights, getting the kitchen cleaned up before I go to bed, and it just suddenly hits. Oh, I know why that happened. If only the old synapses could actually fire while I was actually doing the thing, that would probably be a lot nicer. Now, what we're also going to do is create a user Linux keys. Do I have a super plus T in here? No, I don't. Okay. I wonder if I should try something a little different here, just for kicks. Nah, I'll totally forget if I do that. So this command is create data URI, like so. We're not taking any arguments. So let's see what happens when I push the key. All right, that seems to be cool. Now, we need, as the first step here, to be able to obtain the file name of whatever it is we're looking at. And that reminds me that the other thing I wanted to do is this, so that there is a PNG image here for us to do something with. A nice PNG image of my head, which you may remember from the stream where we were playing with the HTML parts of the new, well, just Sublime in general, and some of the new things. Now, one of the things that I'm interested in here is what happens if I do this. That still works, so that's great. So what we're going to do here first, because I'm not 100% sure how this all works out. The entire country is in lockdown, so quite bored. Yeah, For me, actually, except for having my morning walks and my weekend walks in the mornings be sort of curtailed because I don't want to be out and about too much. This actually hasn't impacted my life that much because I work from home and I have for like the last too many years. So I'm kind of used to never really leaving the house and only having contact with my coworkers on the phone and through video conferencing. So to some degree, it's kind of business as usual as far as my life is concerned. But there's still, other issues like knowing if I wanted to go out somewhere, I can't or shouldn't anyway. Nothing builds up a more powerful urge to get a hamburger and an ice cream cone than knowing that you shouldn't be doing it. And even if you tried, the place probably isn't even open. Uh, active view. I'm interested in what this returns. If you missed the earlier part of the stream, we're making a thing that creates a data URI. And then if that is something that actually works, we're going to try and do something that previews them on hover. And I have some notes over in the side there. But the first part is knowing that, check this out. Here, if I do this, there is a none in that one. But here, there's a view. And there's a reason for that. And that is that every view, every tab is represented by a sheet, but every sheet isn't represented by a view. And this is one of those things that you can go a long ways in the Sublime API and doing plugins and never really have to deal with at all. Sheets are sort of magic in that regard. But notice if I have a file tab located here, and I said window.active sheet. I guess I probably could have just typed that. Window.active sheet, like so. We get something that is a Sublime text sheet, whereas over here, we end up with something called a Sublime.image sheet. So all the tabs are represented by sheets. That's sort of the API abstraction that Sublime uses to represent the content of any particular tab. Everything has to be a sheet. Text files and regular views are text sheets. We also have image sheets, and we now also, in the latest builds of Sublime, have HTML sheets, which we've seen in previous things. So what we actually want to do here is not active view, but active sheet, like so, because we always want to know what the active sheet in a file is, or in the window is, even if it happens to be a text file. Is there a package for that? But it seems to be, yeah, it seems to use an external program for creating data URIs or for showing a little hover pop-up of them. Possibly both. That's something I mentioned earlier, and it's also something I mentioned earlier this week in the Discord. Often when there's something I want to do in Sublime, my first thought is, how could I build that and not has somebody already done it? Which is just sort of the nerd in me, if you will. My nickname is kind of well placed because I write software for a living, but I also write code for fun. So it seems more fun to try and work out how to do something like this than to just find a ready-made solution. Probably a good idea to find a ready-made solution if you're in a hurry and you need something now. Otherwise, maybe I'll build something that works and I can use it, and maybe I won't be able to finish it. Maybe it won't do what a person might want, but I will have learned a hell of a lot in the process. So that seems like a good idea. What I'm going to say here is, because every sheet, every tab represents a sheet, but not every sheet represents a view, one of the things we can do here is say sheet is equal to self.window.active sheet. Now what this is all really coming down to is we need to know the file name of the current file so we can do something with it. And we need to know if it's an image, and we need to know if it's not an image. No matter what it is, we need to be able to ask for a file. But if you were to say self window active view in an image, you end up with none. So that is not good. So we need to say self.window.active_sheet. Now, here in this text file, if I asked it what the active sheet was and asked it for a file name, does that work? It does. I think that is something that's actually related to the sheet class itself. Yeah, I'm the same. I actually have more packages now than I have in a long time, and that's because for the last few streams I've been creating packages to put the stuff that I'm working on in instead of doing it in my user package. There's not a lot that I do that requires extra packages. Like I don't use LSP because I'm not as interested in that level of autocomplete. I kind of when I started programming way many years ago, that wasn't a thing that actually existed. And by the time it started being more popular, it wasn't one of those things that I sort of came to rely on. It's definitely nice for auto completing the names of things. I find, and this is something I was actually mentioning to Keith not so long ago, or maybe so long ago. I'm terrible with times. Some things that have auto completion systems in them um, are really draconian, for lack of a better term. For example, if I was to hit the key to open up the autocomplete here, I get it, and I can just start typing. And if I don't pick anything, then I'm just getting what I typed, which is what I expect to have happen. But for example, I've found this to be a problem with LinkPad and Visual Studio. The first times I've used it, as you're starting to type something, it pops up the autocomplete, and like it insists that you want something from here. So whereas in Sublime, if I said DR, it knows there's not a completion, it just closes the panel. But other systems tend to decide, oh, well, I guess you just wanted the text that's currently selected in the autocomplete. And then as a result, I end up with an autocompletion I didn't want. I actually spend more time undoing things that it thought it was doing to save me time than I actually save. There's probably settings to actually fiddle with that, but I've always just sort of shied away from it. So I don't really use, LSP for that kind of thing, and I don't really tend to use linters, although probably I should based on all of the obvious problems I sometimes have when I'm doing things, but I find that irritating as well. I have forced to use one at work, uh, and it's like not cool. Now, what we're going to do here is figure out this. We're going to say something like creating data URI for, and then we're going to say that and file name. Because what we ultimately want is to be able to grab the content of some file either from a view here or from disk and convert it into what it needs to be in the data URI. And we need to have a file name, and that's going to give it the name of the file because apparently text sheets totally respond to that. And over here, it's still doing something. Now, oh, I cannot type. This is an image that's inside of a theme. It's inside of a Sublime package file. And it can't load those for whatever reason. I think although the open file command is smart enough to know that if you try to open a file and it appears to be in the packages folder, but it doesn't exist, look inside of the plugin, the Sublime package file. It doesn't seem to do that for images. So in this case, if I was to push the key, we're getting what appears to be the correct name, but the file doesn't exist. So that's something that we need to take into account here. And that one's going to work, and that's going to work. Now, if you have a tab that doesn't have any text actually associated with it yet, then the file name is none. The file name isn't actually set until the first time you save the buffer, or if you use the view.retarget method to specifically tell a view what file name it's associated with. So that's going to give us the file name of the thing we want. And I'm going to say that we want this to be sheet.filename or unknown.text, like so, because we're going to say for what we're about to do, we want to have a file name always. And if we don't have a file name, we can't infer, at least I don't want to infer, uh, what sort of file this is. There might actually be a way around that. Hang on a second. I can't remember. I have the change log over here. Assign syntax? No. Sublime.list syntaxes. What does this return? Since we're targeting the new version of Sublime, Sublime.list syntaxes. And we'll say we want the first one, let's say. The name of the syntax, the name of that, what its scope is. Now, the other thing, we can do something with, uh-oh, my dog is barking. Sublime.find syntax takes, let's say, sample.py. Yeah, that doesn't give us the extension that the file needs, does it? Okay. Hang on just a tick. We'll see if he actually listens to that. He may not. He's that way. There's a dog barking in the hallway, so we can only, put up with so much. What we're actually going to be doing here, essentially, I guess I should probably stop bearing the lead, is find my little notey things, because this is not the sort of thing that I generally do, but we want to be able to import mime types, like so. And then we can say mime types.guess for file name. So, whoop. Excuse me. I did not read the full note. When there's lots of text highlighting, it's a bad scene. So this is something text related, specifically Python source code. And this one is going to be an image. Did it actually have an encoding in that? It did not. And this one would also be an image. So if there was something that wasn't saved yet, we don't know what kind of file it is, then it's plain text. Now, theoretically, something like this could be the case. This could be like a Python file. But I don't think there's a new API method. The new ones are list syntaxes and find syntax. And list syntaxes, the information that it had in there didn't include the name of it, but not the extension that would be associated with it, or the list of extensions. So I don't think it's reasonably easy, given a syntax, to figure out what extension the file should have for the purposes of passing it to the guess mime type function without doing something similar to what this is doing, which is finding every syntax and pulling the name out, which is no longer necessary now because Sublime can actually do this. By loading up the actual syntax files, the Sublime syntax file or the TM language file, you could actually get the list of extensions out of a syntax, but there could be more than one of them. And are they all the same mime type? I don't know. So for our purposes here, we're going to assume that this is going to be something that we are interested in. Excuse me, that we're going to get a sheet. We're going to ask for a file name. We're going to guess its mime type. So we might say file type is equal to mime types.guess1, I suppose. Whoops. Excuse me, that's not how that works. That's not how that works at all. Ooh, unknown modifiers. I've never seen that before. How did I make that happen? Turning numlock on and off. That's probably not something that they expected to have happen. Or there's something horribly wrong with this keyboard. What about scroll lock? I can't tell if it's on or not. That one doesn't have an indicator. It's supposed to, but it doesn't. We're just going to go ahead and pretend we didn't notice that, because I noticed this version is fixing some key binding problems. They may have thrown something in there as a debug log for people to be able to see. So we're going to say I have to go back and actually do the thing again. Man, did I not do that? No, I guess I didn't. I guess I just ran the command, didn't I? Yeah, it's the first thing. Okay. We'll go ahead and do this. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's the part that got us into this problem in the first place. That, and we want the first thing in there. We don't care about the encoding for the purposes of this. And I guess we could, just to verify that we're doing that right, file type, groovy. Now, if this is sort of a design decision, when it comes to an image, we really have no choice but to access the image file directly as it appears on disk, which might throw an error for something like this. It still ends up being considered an image, but the file doesn't actually exist on disk. It's in a Sublime package file. And I don't know that I want to try and hunt that sort of business down. Could be a version 2 kind of thing. Here, this is the same thing. But for a file, do we want to pull the content of this from disk? Or do we want to pull it from the current view so you have what's the most recent thing? Since you probably don't want to create a data URI out of a text file anyway, maybe that doesn't really matter. I'm going to assume we always want to read it from a file, let's say, just because it makes the code a little bit easier. So we know we've got that going on. Now, if I find my notes here, there's a few things that we need to know, and one of them is this. And this is probably one of those things that all kinds of people know, but I don't because I'm not really a web developer. I just play one on TV, and I drink coffee. Those things may or may not be unrelated. Data URLs always start with the text data and the colon. And then they have a media type, usually, which would be the mime type, which is why we're looking that up. It doesn't have to be there, but it usually is. After that would be a semicolon, followed by standard header type things like, meta key equals value. Is there an example of that over here? Because I don't know what one would actually be. Something like text/HTML semicolon char set equals ISO 61 or something along those lines. If this is going to be a binary file, then you throw on a semicolon and the text base 64. Otherwise, you leave that out. Then you put a comma. Comma always has to be there. Then the actual data. If this is a binary thing, you have to encode it as base 64 text. And if it's not binary, then it's a string, but you have to, URL encode it because spaces are never allowed inside of a URI. And the question from Ashwin in the thing is, does it make a difference if it's pulled out of a view or from the disk? The only difference that makes is if I did it here right now, I have unsaved changes. Do I expect that when I run this command that it's going to pull what I see? Or do I expect that it's going to pull what is the official version of the file, because I may have partial changes in here that maybe I want reflected and maybe I don't. From a usability standpoint, I can see arguments both ways. You might want to make a quick change to a file. Certainly in the case of this, we kind of have no choice but to pull it from a view because there's not any file that's currently on disk right now. So that's a thing. So we might need to rethink that in just a second here. But other than that, no, it's just sort of a, would you rather kind of thing. Certainly if you want to get the data out of a view, it's a lot easier because view.subster can't fail, but opening a file might if there's permission problems or something. Probably unlikely to happen. If you can be editing a file, you could probably view the contents, but a lot of really awful bugs have gotten into the wild with people assuming that can't happen. So now that you say that, what happens? Whoops, don't do that. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. I'm going to do it this way instead. I'm going to cut that part off and do this. Which, oh. I don't know how that keeps getting turned on. It's kind of irritating. Let's close that down too so we actually have this. Creating data URI %s for that. And then we're going to wrap this and we're going to say file type and file name. So here's the idea. Here, it's a Python file stored at that file name. Here, it's an image stored at that file name. Here, it's an image stored at that file name. Here, it's text, but there's no file name. So that would allow us to figure out if we need to do something a little bit different there. The other aspect of this is a little bit of this, and maybe we put it here instead. Import base 64. I spent a bit of time investigating this. It's kind of funny that spaces in base 64 data are allowed, but in data URIs, not so much. But I found some people saying that the easier way to do this is instead of using what we're going to use, you can actually just give it like a file object and it'll automatically read it and page it in base 64 it for you, but it generates potentially more than one line, which is not something that we can use in here. So that's sort of unfortunate as these things go. Now, we need to know a little bit of information here. We need to know if this is going to be binary or if it's going to be text. This is one of those things where we did a, oops. Yeah, sure. What about that? In this one, that's still text plain. All right, it doesn't have a file name. That's not going to work. I assume HTML is text HTML is a mime type, right? I really should know more about that. It's been a long time since I fiddled with the server. Yeah, we'll go ahead and say that. So we're going to say is binary is equal to file type dot starts with not file type starts with text. Let's say. So anything that starts with text is a text file. Anything else is binary. That sounds right, right? Like application slash JSON, which I think is the official MIME type for why when I'm debugging a web service, it constantly tries to save files to disk instead of just showing me the dang text of the thing. And we'll do a little bit of that too, so we can say this. Make sure our suppositions going in are borne out. Not binary. 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 For at least the three things we're testing with, that's totally something we want. Great. So now we need something like get file content, and we're going to say file name and is binary. Now, what are we going to do in this thing? Why did I decide to do it that way? I'm sure I had a thought. Oh, you are annoying, you are. We want this to return back bytes, I suppose. Let's go ahead and declare what we want to do. Given a file name, return back a bytes object that represents. Oh, do we want bytes? I don't know that we do. Return back a base 64 encoded version of the content of the file. This binary is used to determine how we should fetch the data. I guess in order to actually pull this from a view, we need a view too, don't we? This is going off the rails quickly. So let's say we only need we'll do that. If there's no file name, but there is a view, then get the content from the view. That way we can still do it for unsaved buffers, and at least something will happen. The alternative to that is to just throw something up into the status bar. Maybe that's a nicer way to go. Then we don't even have to know that part. That might actually be cool. Let's expand, let's modify what we're going to do. Let's say is enabled. Return self.window.activesheet.file name is not none. That way it'll only ever trigger for something that actually has a file name. It won't actually work here. Yeah. That's nicer. Then we don't need to worry about this business. We just need to know a file name, and then we also don't need to worry about this, because whatever the file name is, it's going to work out to be something. And I assume if it doesn't know what the file type is, it would return text.plain. Oh, I kind of broke it. Oh, it ends up being none. Man, that's uncool. I mean, I guess it makes sense that you might want to know when it's unknown. All right, from now on, if there's a file and it doesn't know what it is, it's plain text. Problem solved. Now we don't need to worry about that. We don't need to worry about that. We're going to, given a file name, return back a base64 version of the content of the file. Did someone just hear a noise? Was that me? Am I hallucinating? What was that? All right. Is binary is used to determine how we should fetch the data. No, that's not what we want. Well, I guess it kind of is. Out of the file. Yeah. Oops. Oh, actually, I suppose we should say none is returned if the file is not accessible. Okay. With that out of the way, let's adjust our chair. Get cracking. We're going to need to know something like file mode is equal to read if, RB if is binary else R. Like so. And we want to try except. Da, 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 and well, we'll throw a pass in there. What we're going to say is with open file name, file mode as handle. Do we remember how base64 encoding works? Data equals handle.read. And then data equals base64 dot. Oh, actually, I don't even need to do that. I can just return it back, can't I? Return base64 dot b64 encode bytes. Oh, sorry, data. Now that I think of it, maybe the binary thing is what we want because this base64 encode jiggy requires bytes no matter what. So maybe we don't actually even care about that, to be perfectly honest. Let's just do that. Then we don't even need to have this bit. We still need to know that to be able to generate the this thing, because we need to know. Oh, actually, yeah, I guess that is something we needed to know, isn't it? Shoot, I forgot what I was doing there. Okay, put that all back. But, okay. Cool. Now, if is binary, then do that. Else, we need to pull in one more thing. I hope. Oh no, I didn't save it in my notes. That's unfortunate. Crap on a cracker. Yeah, that's just not in there. That's unfortunate. We need to know Python space code URL. Yeah. Oh, actually, let's try it this way. Boop, boop, boo. How do I detect if a file is binary? Yep, gave up on that business. Gave up on that business hardcore. And we want something like this. Okay. I found the thing that I found before. We're going to import. And again, I'm not, except for Sublime, I don't really do a lot of Python stuff. Certainly don't do a lot of web stuff one way or the other. I know my code is broken. You leave me alone, sir. I'm getting to it. I'm getting to it right now. So we want the file mode to be binary if this is a binary thing. Otherwise, we want it to be just regular text. And then open the file with the file mode. And whoops, if we actually we read the data out, which I assume is going to give us bytes or not. That might be something unfortunate. In just a second. If this is binary, then base64 encoded. Otherwise, return url lib.parse.quote for the data, which we assume is a string. And return none. We might say something like what? IO exception is E. Sublime.status message. I can't remember, is this one or the window one that is deprecated? This is an old API. Use the window. Right on, right on. I can remember that. And the status message we would apply here is that. But otherwise, leave it alone. That's probably not as clean as it could be. There's probably multiple different types of things. And for our purposes, testing this actual thing, we might actually say something like print. We're going to be real unhappy about this in a second. turn off word wrap to automatic self.get file content with the file name and is binary. All right, let's see what happens. We're in this Python file and I hit the key. And what we end up with is a space encoded version of the content. Import %20, %20 is space. I know my hex. Sublime %OA, that's a line feed. Import Sublime plugin. Boom. So we ended up with this. And yes, this is actually a thing you could do if you wanted to pack a text file inside of a web page for whatever reason. I'm not entirely sure what the utility of that is. It's a thing. That's all I know. And spaces aren't allowed anywhere in here, which is why you have to do that. And if there was an image and I did it, we end up with bytes. Oh, I guess I need to encode that as UTF-8, I would imagine. Yeah, okay. We can fix that. I don't remember that being the case, but oops, maybe we might. Well, actually, that's actually the default, isn't it? But it's nice to declare your explicit intention. If we did it for this file, status message takes 2 arguments, but 3 were given. Really? It's undocumented. Oh, I guess I could actually. Oh. Ha 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 ha. I'm too used to using my own logging method. Okay, let's try that again. No such file or directory. Cool. Unable to access file. Nope. Right on. All right, so that's cool. That is, ooh, none. Why is that none all of a sudden? Did that throw an error? No. Well, that's weird. Oh. Bytes object has no. Really? Really? Oh. Learn something new every day. B64 encode. Hi. Oh, right. Excuse me. A bytes-like object is required. Convert bytes to a string. Do a thing, do a thing. You need to decode. Oh, right. That'll probably work better, huh? It's already bytes. We don't need to encode it. There. Cool. Now we're getting some nice action. If the file doesn't exist, it gets all mad at us. And we don't even need that return none. I waffle back and forth over whether or not I think explicit returns of none are actually good or not. Now we need to actually create the URI for this thing. So the first thing we're going to do is pull all of this all the way down here. I like that. This numeric keypad is seriously getting on my pecs. I spent too much time working on a different keyboard today. Okay. So, copy a data URI for the file currently for the tab currently active in the window to the clipboard. that's what we're going to try and pull off here. This works with plain text and image files. Or really any binary file, for that matter. Yeah. Why am I having such a hard time with that today? Boop. Reformat. Cool. I prefer mechanical keyboards over the rubber membrane silent type ones, or the kind that appear on laptop keyboards that don't have a lot of key travel. This one is a Philco Magistype 2 with cherry brown mechanical switches, which is why you can hear it click so satisfyingly. But apart from that, my first real computer that wasn't ColecoVision Atom was an IBM XT, like a literal 8088 IBM giant monster with a power switch that was like this big. And it had a honking huge mechanical keyboard with a dedicated uh, numeric keypad, and it didn't have the little arrow keys cluster that we're used to on today's keyboards. It was very big, the standard 104 key thing. And I've never actually officially learned to touch type by, the courses that people normally take, because way back in grade 5 is when I started using computers, and I sort of just came up with my own, touch typing method. So I got excused from having to do that class in high school because the teacher thought it would do me more harm than good to try to teach me the correct way to do it. So I don't really have a home row thing, which is, you've noticed, probably does me some level of harm. But I prefer mechanical keyboards that have the larger layout because I have larger hands. I prefer boards that have the numeric keypad on the side. I really prefer the kind that have the ergonomic split as a slight V, but not necessarily this style. This isn't one, but Microsoft makes, I guess I should hold it up there, one like this. It's got that weird wave to it that I don't like, but they also had one that sort of had a split in it that wasn't. It was okay. I spent a lot of years, a good 10 years on a keyboard like that, and then it broke, and they just stopped making that particular style. They were all like wavy and weird angles and stuff, so I had to go back to a regular keyboard. It took me a long time to get used to my thumbs bumping together in the middle. I like having two space bars. You can really play games faster that way. Um, at one point, I annoyed the hell out of a roommate by being able to type really fast, and being like in a forum or on IRC or other chat mediums, talking with people at night. I would totally harass her by keeping her awake, hearing the keyboard clack like a machine gun going off in the other room. But what can I say? I'd like to know I pressed a key. We're going to make a method named makeDataURI, and we're going to give this something that is file type is binary and data, let's say. And there's something we need to do with this. So let us say we want to return. I guess we don't really need that, do we? We want it to always start with data. Now, I can't remember, is a mime type always required or no? So let's go ahead and try to remember the... Oh, did I not save that either? Come on, man. Life is rough. All right, well, let's do this. Wikipedia. Well, yeah. I visited this page 2 times today. Uniform resource. Oop, don't do that. Mhm. Optional media type may include attribute equals value. A common media type parameter is charset. Well, we're not going to be doing that here because I don't want to try and figure it out. You definitely want to have it for an image, I think. But for everything else, do we care? I guess for the sake of clarity, yes. So there's going to be a type. And the next part is we need to krang in base 64 if we base 64 encoded this, but no base 64 if we didn't. And technically, this media type thing, as we just saw over here, can have any number of key equals value things that are separated by semicolons. And as far as that page is concerned, the base 64 thing is the only one that doesn't have an equals value on it. Yeah, I feel the same way. I like the looks of the big Mac monitors and the nice little keyboards, but then I think if I was actually to try to use one, I don't think it's gonna work all that well. Um, a real problem I have with those sorts of keyboards in general is if they don't have a far enough key travel down, I I tend to not press them hard enough. That might also be because I'm used to the mechanical switches that are sort of guided down by the mechanism, but the little, the bubble on the membrane keyboards, it's possible for to push the key down in a way where it hasn't gone all the way down. But with one of mechanical key, once you push it so far, it just sort of automatically goes on its own for the rest of the way. We do actually want a comma there, and then we want data. I'm putting too many of these things, aren't I? Again, mixing technologies, never a good idea. Okay. Type is going to be equal to file type, like so. And binary is going to be equal to, whoops, semicolon base 64. Problems I have with keyboards sometimes are if it's slightly more to the left or the right than I expect, all my fingers get off by one. Probably an example of that whole knowing the home row thing. But in this particular case, this keyboard doesn't have those little bumps on, whatever keys are supposed to have little bumps on them to let you know. Unless that's no longer a thing because that keyboard doesn't have them either. J and F, the Mac has them. Whoops. Hopefully we're still streaming. Don't touch the Mac. It's a delicate balance. We wanted that to be base 64. If is binary else an empty string, and then we just want data equals data. And we can go ahead and return that. So the data URL always starts with data and a colon. It's always going to have a content type like text slash plain or text slash HTML or text slash whatever that was for the Python file when we did it. That's going to be the only content header we put in here. Then binary is either going to be the semicolon that terminates the previous type and then adds on base 64, or nothing if it's not base 64. There always has to be a comma even if the data is empty, which is also something I learned from that data URI scheme thing. And what it also mentions is spaces are never allowed inside of a data URI ever, which is why we're using the encoding that we're using here, the URL lib parse quote, which might be more draconian than it needs to be, but we definitely want spaces. I think uppercase, lowercase, and some punctuation characters are allowed. Now, Base 64, it uses two characters that are technically not allowed to be part of URLs, which is the slash and like the underscore or a dash or something. Let's see. By plus and slash, no. Boop, boop. Base 64 encoded data URIs use the standard base 64 character set with plus and slash as characters rather than the so-called URL safe base 64. The magic of this is those two characters are not supposed to be part of a URL because they're treated specially, but for the specific purpose of a data URL, they are allowed. For everything else, they're not. So that I think should, as far as I've been able to learn, should do the thing that we are wanting it to do. So I guess we could say data equals this bit. We'll go ahead and cut that out. And then say if data, let's say if not data, no, that's no good. If data is none. It's possible for data to be an empty string. That's still a valid data URL, albeit a useless one. Then we will say self.window.status message. My chair's in a funky position too. Actually, we don't have to do anything. We can just return because we've already said the reason why we returned none. So I guess we can just do this the other way. And don't bother doing that because it doesn't matter. We could just say URI is equal to self.make data URI of, frankly, if we're going to do it that way, maybe we don't even care about that. Maybe we just pull this code down. We don't even need it to be a method. It didn't seem to be as complicated as I originally thought it might be. We'll go ahead and indent that out a little bit. Whoops, that one probably shouldn't have been indented, but that's okay because we don't really care about it anymore. And then we can say, I think it's sublime.setClipboard, clipboard URI, and self.window.status message that. And let's go ahead and verify to the content of the clipboard. Go me. Plus that whole going to the top of the file thing looks like it's working. Okay, we definitely don't need that. Ensure that we're only enabled for files that have been persisted to disk. Cool. Cool. So let's see what happens. In this file, data URI copied, and if I was to paste it, data : text / xpython, and then a comma, I meant some stuff. That seems like it's probably doing a thing. And if I was in here and I did it, then that looks like data : image / PNG semicolon base 64 and some stuff. That's cool. That worked. This one should just generate an error, no such file. In which case it didn't put anything on the clipboard and it left the clipboard alone, so that's probably cool. Yeah, I guess that is where it's at. Just double check. That one did not have the thing. It just had the comma. Right. I guess we need an empty file here. Let's do this just to see. Data URI copied. It's an HTML page with no content in it. This is, in fact, a valid data URI. So phase 1 of operation, is this possible? Complete. Oh, actually, I suppose I probably should have kept that, huh? We'll leave that there. Okay. Maybe we'll even do a little bit of that. I guess it behooves us to actually test this thing out, right? So let's see. If I was here and I did that, and then I came here, and then I pasted that there, and maybe turned off word wrap. Boop. I mean, unhappiness levels are at an all-time high. If I did this, anything? Anything? Oh, Firefox. Thanks, pal. Well, that worked. So, whee! Shamedy shame on File Manager for not using web browser to do that, because otherwise it picks the wrong thing, and that's irritating. Okay. Now, is there a reason to use data URI for anything other than an image? Beats the hell out of me. Let's do the second part of this operation, wherein we see if we can make some sort of hover pop-up that shows you an image when you do that. Oh, hey, hang on a second. I'm going to click this thing. What's happening over here? I should have written autocomplete selector is evaluated at the position after the inserted character. Autocomplete trigger is evaluated at the position before the inserted character. I should probably change that. It's only like that for historical reasons. That's a little something that someone was asking earlier in the Discord. So that's probably not interesting to anyone. But okay. Whoa, don't go away. So phase one of can you make a data URI out of a file is yes. And it actually turns out it's fairly simple. I mean, maybe it needs to be more complicated if we need to figure out what character set this currently is, or maybe there could be some setting for it or something. Nevertheless, that is, the thing. Here's something I wanted to check. That still works, huh? Cool. Because we can say new file relative to current view. And what we call this, data URI tool dot Sublime commands. And then go ahead and say, save that. And the command is, that thing what we just been doing. Create. Oh, it's not going to go, huh? Create data URI. Create data URI. No, underscore, man. Underscore. All right, so copy data URI to clipboard. Bound to super T and data URI copied. And that one's not interesting, although it would be decidedly meta to data URI a file that has a data URI in it. What if I was in this file? Nope. That seems like it's working too. Gravy. We don't care about that one anymore. And probably don't care about that one anymore. But now we've totally got, just for the sake of clarity. Oh yeah, that's totally a thing. I can't believe I had to do that to be able to see what that was. I was thinking of creating key binding to be able to do that as well. One of the funny things, I mentioned this previously, but I spent the better part of 2 decades using VI or Vim as my editor of choice. Before I, excuse me, ended up switching over to Sublime to get away from some other tools I was using that weren't Vim related for Java development and stuff. And my coworker got me into that using VI because he had been using it for even longer. Well, I guess he'd been using it for like 5 or 6 years prior at that point. Often the two of us, one way or the other, would say, hey, how do you do blah in VI? Like, I want to copy the thing or I want to do a thing. And the ultimate answer was always hang on a second, watch my fingers. And then we'd sit down and do the thing, and you'd have to watch and see what your fingers did to be able to, like, oh, I see, I used, D and then a C and then a 2 to do that. But, it's not the sort of thing that when you try to just reel it off in your head. And interestingly enough, we both had vastly different ways to accomplish the same things too. So you get into that real muscle memory with keyboard shortcuts when you become really proficient with something that your brain just pushes the thing and you don't really give it any logical thought. And then you think, hey, D for data URI. I wonder if Control KD does something. And then as soon as you see the log, you're like, oh yeah, obviously it does something. It does an important thing. What the hell was I thinking? Okay, so the next thing we're gonna need in here is an event listener. How do we want to do this? I think, and Keith and I were discussing a little bit about how this should work. So the idea is we're going to set something up so that if you hover your mouse over URI thusly, then, and it's data URI, it could pull the whole thing out and show you a hover pop-up. Or could possibly also inject inline phantoms underneath all of the lines or something along those lines. I'm thinking hover pop-ups is the way to go because it's less obtrusive. Now, how do we actually pull that off? Because definitely we could have an event listener and definitely we can hover, but how do you, in a sane, easy way, know that if the cursor is over top of this B, that this is a B that's part of a data URI and not just a B in the buffer? Certainly, we know that this is an attribute, but it's possible for any kind of text to be in any kind of attribute, so that doesn't really help. So you'd have to do something like when you see the hover happen, try to scan backwards until you say hit a double quote. And before you hit the double quote, you need to see data colon image. And if that's the case, then you know this is definitely a data URI. And then you'd have to be able to pull the whole thing out and decode it and display it. That's certainly possible, but it seems like, you know, for hover events, which happen anytime the mouse lands somewhere and stays, a hover event is triggering, even though nothing is responding to it. That doesn't seem like the greatest thing for performance as a whole, right? So our first thought is we got to constrain this somehow to certain file types, which we can easily configure, like only HTML files or only JavaScript files or TypeScript files, one of those three. For now, we're gonna maybe assume just plain HTML, just because that's easier for testing. Maybe not, but you don't want. We want to have something that constrains in what files this can happen, and constrain that in a way that's configurable. Makes sense, right? Data URIs might be within a source attribute, right? Yeah, and I think for our purposes, probably that's the way to go. The way I'm going to do it here, it's just going to try to find any data URI that's an image. So conceivably there could be a text file with them, but yeah, that's a thing. The problem is trying to easily find the text with the regularity of every time the mouse stops. That's not something we want. So what we want to do instead, or what we're going to try to do, and we'll see how well it works, is it's easy to apply a region to the buffer, which more or less sticks with the content of a buffer, right? And it's easy to tell if a point is inside of a region or not. So if there was something that marked a region in this buffer as being a data URI, then we'd know that if we hover the mouse and that point appears anywhere in it, that region represents a data URI, and it's already given us the full extent of how big it is. So that's going to be really easy to do. Every time it hovers, ask Sublime for the list of regions of these things, see if the cursor is in one of them. If there's not, who cares? We're done, right? That leaves us with actually adding the regions to this thing. How do we do that? And there is an onModified event. So we're gonna have an onModified event that triggers, when files are modified. That's just how that works. And if that's the case, then that's going to kick off it looking to see if there are any data URIs. And then it only needs to do that search after you've made modifications of some sort. That's when it would kick it off and look for it. And otherwise, it doesn't have to. And then that information is sort of pre-baked into the buffer. And the unmodified handler happens anytime any modification happens. So we're going to throw a debounce in there that says that if a modification happens and then another modification starts, that resets the amount of time. Basically what we're going to say is 2 seconds after the last time a modification was made, that's when we're going to kick off a search for data URIs. And anytime another modification happens within that 2-second window, that extends the amount of time it's going to be until that actually happens. So in order to do all that, we're going to need an event listener. So let's say URI hover event listener. And we're going to say that that is a view event listener, because that way these events will automatically constrain themselves based on us implementing the method that says that they are supposed to be there. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of this too. And then that just makes, you could do the same sort of thing with a non view event listener with just a regular event listener, but then the unmodified event happens for every file that's ever modified. And then you'd have to go and check and see, should I be, is this a file that I care about? And if we do that once at the top, then we don't have to do it every time, which makes the code a little bit cleaner, a little bit nicer. I think so anyway. I like to have a little something like that going. So we're going to have a class method of is applicable, which has a class and settings, and we're going to return true. I think the default is that anyway. We'll go ahead and do a little bit of that. And yeah, settings return true. Class method returns a setting, receives a settings object. I'm pretty sure that the default for this is yes, because if you don't apply it, do this, then it triggers for everything. Whoops, I want to be over here. Pardon me. A couple extra spaces in here. Watch for file changes and hovers in. Let's say in configured files to see if we should be displaying any previews or not, and if so, from what URIs. Okay, and we'll go ahead and wrap that. Might move this to the top just so that that's a little nicer to do something with. Right on. Okay, now let's say we actually want to have some sort of configuration file for this thing. So we might say new file relative to current view, and what will we call it? Data URI tool dot Sublime dash settings, and that's going to have one of those. And then we need to say Sublime dot load settings data URI tool. Okay, now it is totally tracking that the settings file exists. Active scopes, and that's going to be a list of things, and let's say, oops, text.html, whoops, as an example. Dot basic. Yeah. This could also be one of those things that you can enable and disable on a view-by-view basis. That's something that packages like this sometimes do. You sometimes see something that is potentially obtrusive, like automatic package reloader or live reload, uh, having the ability to just have it always globally enabled and having the ability to have to manually turn it on for a file, and by the same token being able to toggle the state for a particular file, so you can decide if you always want to do it or you only sometimes want to do it, or you want to do it most of the time but not here. You get that sort of extra stuff. So we have some settings here. Now what we're gonna do is copy that. We're going to need some stuff here. We're going to say, da, da, da. And actually what we're going to do is crib this from override audit. Really? We're going to be that way, huh? Come on, man. Wonder why that didn't work. We're going to need a bit of that and a bit of, oh, actually, I guess I probably should have did that the other way. A bit of that and a bit of that as well. Okay, go back to the other window. Why are we so angry, my friend? Oh, because of that. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, there wasn't anything else exciting about that, right? No. Okay. So we're not actually going to call this OA setting. We're going to call it just, we'll call it URI setting, shall we? So let's go ahead and swap all that. And the default value for that is this, and this should be data URI tool.sublime settings. Oh, get a. So this is one of those things that I tend to do in all of my packages. Don't necessarily need to do it. Every time you call sublime.load settings with the name of a settings file, it returns back a settings object. Once it's loaded once, the same object gets returned back every single time. And that one settings object is the same settings object returned to me when I do it, you when you call it from your plugin inside of the same instance of Sublime, and so on. Everyone shares the same settings object, which is backed by this settings file, and all of the other files that contributed to it, like the user versions of the settings, are automatically overlaid on top of the package version of the settings. Anytime any setting anywhere within the hierarchy changes, the settings object automatically updates to tell you that. So if we call load setting once, we don't have to call it every time we want to access a setting. And what I'm doing here is saying that this function, when you call it, you're going to give it a settings key. It's going to return back the value as sort of a little cache. So this is storing the settings object as an attribute to the URI setting function, so that it doesn't have to be a global. It's just associated with the function itself. And there's also a list of the default values. So I can call URI setting for any of the settings that I know should exist in here, and I'll always get back a sensible default value, even if the settings file doesn't have the setting. Like, for example, if I was a complete idiot and deleted all of these lines, calling this function would return this one. It's just the thing I like to do, because then if you ever want to get a setting, it's just one simple call. You don't have to worry about the name of the settings file, loading it, checking if it's a default, all that business. So I suppose what we should probably do is a little bit of, whoops, that's not what I meant to do. A little bit of that, I should say. I don't actually want that open anymore, so let's go ahead and do that. But we'll come back over to here. And now here's an issue. This is settings. So we can't do it by scope. Right. Can only do it by things that exist in the settings object. So that would be something like thus. That's not even the correct syntax, to be perfectly honest. This could be an example of that syntax thing that we covered earlier. Always looking for an excuse to do something like that. Sublime.list syntaxes. If we had a top level scope, that would tell us, if we had the syntax, we could see if it matched the scope. That seems like a nice thing to do, doesn't it? For our purposes, you know, what the hell? Syntax equals settings dot get syntax. For syntax in Sublime dot list syntaxes. How did we say we want to do this? We need to find only the entry for this particular syntax, right? So if syntax path is equal to the syntax, then we need to do a thing. And okay, we're going to say return false here. I mean, that's always going to go every time, right? So if ask the setting, oh, don't call it as a function. That's not going to work. Ask the settings object to give you the syntax. Find all of these syntaxes. If the syntax file in this entry is the one that's in this buffer, then if, oh, do I need a view for that? Is that a Sublime? No, huh? Well, that's unfortunate. Crap on a cracker. I thought there, oh. Score, let's see, selector, sublime.score selector. Yeah, all right, cool. I knew there was a way to do that. If sublime.score selector, now the scope name that we're scoring against is the syntax scope, right? Yeah, that's even got the right name. And the selector we're using is, well, for our purposes here, let's say text.html. Print syntax is, oh, actually we'll do that up here. Do it once. Print syntax is and syntax like so. And this is the one and return true. Not that this thing does anything exciting anyway. So it's getting called for a bunch. Why is that? You know, to be perfectly honest, I wouldn't have expected that to have been called for every potential thing. Let me turn word wrap back on here for a second. I have a feeling that it totally knows. Yeah, it gets called one time for that. Okay, so if we close that, when we open that file, yeah, see, why is it triggering for everyone? Um, hmm, hmm, hmm. Really getting hung up in the weeds on this operation. Not entirely sure why it gets called 3 times either for that case. But whatever it is, it's not the one. A score of 0 means no match. Above 0 means a match. Right. So 0 is none, right? And really, the confusing part is why it's triggering so many times. So let's go ahead and clear this. No syntaxes. No syntaxes, you say. Oh, huh. All right. Let's say we spelled it correctly. How about that, huh? Oh, hang on. Clear. Oh, cripes. That is unfortunate. Okay. How about if we're not a fool? Clear that console. Take a look. Syntax is this syntax. If syntax in, if this it only applies to 1. Right on. I'm going to clear that console. We're going to see. We've said that this should only apply to things that match this. Oops, not that one. Not that one, my friends. No, not that one. That one. Only matches basic HTML files, which matches. Why is there a markdown file open? Oh, yeah, there is. There's another window. Oh, right. Oh. All right, that could explain also why I was a little weirded out by the sheer amount of results. Save this file and that. Okay, so we're going to clear that console just to verify this. All of the different files, there's only one that's considered to be HTML, so that's the only one this is going to trigger in. It's not going to trigger in any of the other ones. And we could set this to be just text as well if we wanted to. And then when we save this, it's still triggering there. And if we had a brand new file, it should be triggering in this one as well, I would have thought. Clear console. Clear console. Well, I would have thought so, but we're not going to worry about that. Oh, right, because I hard coded it. I made myself unhappy. Okay, let's go ahead and get rid of that. So this is the syntax of this file. For scope in URI setting for, okay, active scopes. do this. And inside of that loop, list over all syntaxes. Maybe we do that the other way. Maybe we do it this way. For every syntax that exists, I mean, we're going to have to do it a bunch of times anyway, but this list is bigger than this list, so it seems better to do it on the outsider part there. Da, da, da. Scope in active scopes. If this syntax is that one, then instead of saying syntax, instead of doing this, we would use scope here, then return this is the one, and this syntax. Okay, so it's in plain text, it's in that one, and it's in HyperHelp because HyperHelp is a text scope. Cool. And if this was text.plain, then the plugin needs to recalc this, and the only thing that it's available in is that. Now, what that means is that we should have a settings watch on this. So let's go ahead and say to do watch for settings changes and see if the view listeners should change. Not entirely sure how to pull that off, but it's a little something to be cognizant of. So now we're being able to configure how this works. We're going to change that back to text.html. And maybe source.js. Yeah, I should have guessed that that was the case. Go ahead. Da, 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 da. Just so we have a second example of this thing. Zoop. Cool. All right, now we're going to go ahead and get rid of you for the time being. We'll leave you. Our settings now work, and we'll leave that as well. And we're going to go ahead and turn word wrap off in that thing because it reset itself. So now we are really reaching sort of the whole stream limit thing here. Does this thing say a time anymore? No, that's weird. Oh, there it is. Yeah. The first thing we're going to do here, let's go ahead and keep playing with this for a while. We have our event listener. We know our event listener is now only applicable in files where we think it should be applicable. I'm going to go ahead and comment that thing out. So we're going to say def on modified async, which I'm imagining gets itself. It doesn't get a view or anything along those lines. It's just telling us that this file has been modified. So what we're going to do in this case is have a little bit of a thing here. We're going to say important file modified, like so, and save that up. Now, this should only really take effect in files we told it to watch, right? So if we type in here, we can see every time I type something, it is automatically triggering. And if we're going to do something that's lengthy, it's nice that we're doing it in an async thing, but we don't need to do it for literally every single character. So what we're going to do, excuse me, is pending count is going to be equal to 0, like this. And then in our onModified item here, we're going to say self.pendingCount is bigger. So every time this event happens, it's going to add 1 to the pending count, and then it's going to Sublime set timeout. Do I want to do this async? I do. I have some cheaty notes. I sort of worked this part out earlier to make sure that it would work. And we're going to take a lambda. Self.trigger check. Next, we don't really need anything like that, right? No, we don't. Okay, and we want this to trigger after 2 seconds. Okay, now we're going to delete that line and say def trigger check self. Important file modified. So now when we go into this scratch buffer, I make a modification, 1, 2, and that triggers. And then if I type, this is a big long string of text, okay, it takes 2 seconds and then it kicks out. But what this should actually say is self dot pending count minus equals 1. If self dot pending count is not equal to 0, returned. Swank. Don't know why I wasted the time making the note when I forgot that I needed to do that anyway. So again, make a change. 1, 2, update. Now, the idea here is every time onModified async gets called, it adds 1 to that pending count number and then triggers a thing that says, check this in 2 seconds. And the thing that happens in 2 seconds is subtract 1 from the count and then see if the pending count is 0. And if it is, then no other changes have happened. But if a change happened within that 2-second window, then it would kick off another set timeout. And as a part of that, would add 1 to the value. So after it subtracts 1, it would be 1, not 0. It doesn't need to do anything. So now I can say, this is a long string of changes, and we can see that the modified handler is not being updated, and I can't spell for beans when I'm typing fast. And then it updates down there. Exactly what we want to have happen. And then 2 seconds later, boom. So whatever we're going to do, we can do it in trigger check. Thus, we've now got our debounce ready. We're ready to try to actually find a region that matches a data URI. Now, in order to test this I did not do myself, but where is the stupid thing in here? That's the gist I got it from. Oh, this is not, oh, it's not doing word wrap. No wonder that, oh, that's irritating as all hell. Don't do that, man. That's just evil. So we want this. I'm going to paste this in here. Now, this is a regular expression all the way up to this bad boy right here that can find a data URI more or less. It's about 98, 99% accurate. And in order to test this, we're going to do this. This is just a bunch of stuff that I found earlier. I'm going to make a temporary file and, whoa, paste it in. Oh, right. Well, you know what? Hang on a second. Where did I stash that? Let's go to the that. Okay, get rid of that. So there's a bunch of stuff in here. Ah, there we go. Okay, this is the part that we are interested in. So we'll go ahead and cut that part out, close that without saving, go back to our scratch buffer. Boom. Okay, and zoom that out, close the sidebar. This is the gist that I found this regex at. I figured I could probably work one out, but someone probably already did it. And this is the URL, or sorry, I want to say URL. This is the regex that someone came up with for matching a data URI. Now, the issue with this, such as it is it relies on this, that this would be anchored at the start of a string to the end of the string i.e., does this data URI actually match? Does this string actually match a whole URI? But that's not what we want here because we're going to have a whole content of the file. So I took those out, and this is the version of that URI that I modified, and I made two modifications to it. One is I made this, as we can see here, I added this question mark to make this non-greedy, so that because I also added this. I added this first, a positive look ahead assertion that whatever the data URI ends on, if there is a space character, there needs to be a space character or a double quote following it in order for it to match, because spaces aren't allowed in data URIs anywhere. That's why you have to URI encode them, and base64 doesn't include space characters. And if it was going to be in a source attribute or something like that, then it would have a double quote on the end of it. And then after that, I realized that because of the way we're doing the regular expression here, we're going to be using the view.findAll method. It applies this as if the buffer was one big string instead of a line at a time. And as a result, it would find that all of this is one big data URI because this is valid, you know, as it doesn't do validations to make sure that if this says base 64, that this is base 64. It also doesn't do validations of there being key equals value. It just cares about things being separated by semicolons. So as we'll see, there's a couple of things in here that it's not supposed to match on that it's supposed to match on that it doesn't, and vice versa. So I added this to make it say that along with that, this should be non-greedy. So it has to end with a space, and then that's where it stops. Otherwise, it consumes the whole thing. And if I drop that line in here, which I guess was the thing that I already had in there. Whoops. Whoa. No, I hate when I do that. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of that just to make sure that, okay. If I hit this, everything that is a data URI gets regioned out, right? And these are all examples of ones that work. These are the ones that actually came with this regex. These were examples from a JavaScript library, but the regular expression on that might possibly be more robust, but it was also this long. You can't even see my hands. It's like ridiculous. And I think there was a lot of JavaScript regexisms in it. I did not want to screw with that. So we can see here, it's finding all of these right up to, but not including. If there's not a double quote, it works because it's terminated with a new line. If there was some space on at the end of the line, when you do it, the space doesn't get captured in the thing because spaces aren't allowed in these. That means that this guy's assertion that this is a valid data URI is wrong because spaces aren't allowed in here by the robustness of the spec. This thing right here. So that is not, that part doesn't bother me. That one's valid. Now these are not supposed to be valid, but they are. This one and this one are treated as being correct, even though they're not. And the reasons these ones aren't valid is because there's not a value after this equals sign. And the only thing that's supposed to come before this thing is like the base 64, or however it's pulling that off. But for our purposes, I don't care that much about that. So this is going to find us all of the things that look like they are data URIs and throw a region on them. So I'm going to copy that over here into our plugin like so. Now, this needs to be self.view.add regions and self.view.findAll. Now, if we were to actually look at this documentation a little bit and not just assume that you know as much about this as I do, the find all takes a regex pattern, some number of flags, and some other arguments that we're not doing something with here, and finds you a list of all of the regions that match in a non-overlapping way. And see, the only flags we can pass here are don't do regex or ignore case or both of them. And you can pass this if you want a format string, and if you do that, you also have to provide extractions. And I think we saw this in a previous stream. You can use this, the one that was actually recapped for a video on the other channel. You can use this to find all of the regions that match a regex, and you can also use it to pull out the content and apply formatting to it and then put it in the list of extractions. So along with the regions, you get the actual text associated with the thing. So we're doing that to get a list of regions, and then we're using this add regions API to add those with just a comment scope here so that they appear inside of the file, which means that if we were to come to this file and make a change, theoretically that data URI should pop up after a couple of seconds, like so. And away we go with that. And it has found the whole thing. So now we got that part all hooked up for us. And of course, after every 2 seconds, every 2 seconds after a modification, this will happen. Maybe that timeout should be configurable too. As we've seen, that is pretty easy to do. We could add a setting. We could pull that value out. Easy peasy Japanesey, as they like to say, if you watch a lot of Shawshank Redemption. And really like Brooks. So that is going to be working there. It's also theoretically could work in this file as well too. If I did view.erase regions datas, then they'll all go away. But if I modify this, they all come back. So the settings apply to plain text, right? So that is doing what one would expect it to do. So if this is the case, this is all we need to be able to do that. Now maybe we might actually want to make this vaguely intelligible by doing something like this. And we could actually also even add, I mean, realistically, we're probably going to have flags of Sublime.hidden because we don't want to see that. But for the purposes of this, we kind of do. Now we can say def on hover, and we're going to get a self. And I think we're going to get a zone, and then we're going to get a point. To know where this thing actually happened. Am I remembering that correctly? Point hover zone. Crap. I remembered it backwards. Shame on me. Point and zone. Now we know this on hover is only going to trigger in files where we care about it, so we don't even need to do any testing. We can just say if zone is not equal to sublime.hover text return. Well, we don't need to return anything. If the zone is hover text, no, I like it better the other way because otherwise we're going to get into some crazy business. Now we need to say regions equals self.view.get regions datas, which is that. That is the correct thing. And then we can say if not regions, return. There's not already a list of data attributes in here, then I'm sure we don't care about it. Otherwise, we need to say for r in region if, and here we're going to say, actually we could just say region in regions. If region dot contains point, return, then print data URI, and then we'll actually return because the mouse can only be hovering over one region, so there's no point in iterating through more of them. So if we do this, that's a data URI, that's a data URI, and that's a data URI, that's a data URI. Cool, that's what we actually want here, right? Okay, so now we're going to say URI is equal to view.subster region. And now we need to look at an example of one of these things. It needs to start with data colon image, otherwise we don't care. If URI dot starts with, oh, actually, no matter what we do, we're going to do this, but otherwise we're going to return. Yeah. We're going to stop the looking, and it needs to start with data colon image slash, let's say. Then we can say self dot display hover image with URI. Preview URI with URI. And then return, because no matter what, we found a match. We don't need to keep checking, right? Now, everything should work except for it'll throw an error when you do it on an image because, well, view's not defined, so that's probably an issue. Get you used to doing stuff in the console, don't you know? Okay, so that one should work because it's an image, but it can't do anything with it. This one's not an image, so even though it's base 64, it's not going to care. That one's not an image, so it's not going to care. Only things that are images. Now, we probably need to make sure that it's an image that Sublime knows how to display, but I'm going to assume, it's easy enough to constrain that to a list of mime types. So all we need now is a def preview URI, self URI, and then we need to display a pop-up in here, right? And what are we going to do for that? We're not going to push the wrong keys. That's what we're not going to do. The content of this is going to be the HTML, and we're going to say image source equals boop. Now, I'm not entirely sure how well this will work. I think phantoms are more problematic because you need to know the image size. So this is probably a good idea to do something like this. And then we will do URI, like so. Is that as easy as that needs to be? Let's see. Oh. Honestly. Okay. Okay, well, we forgot to pass the rest of the parameters, but that totally worked, so that's cool. So now all we got to do is pass the rest of the stuff that we should be passing here. So let's go ahead and do it this way. This is the content that we want to be displaying, and the flags we want are sublime dot hide on mouse move away. Whoa, that's not right. Content flags, and we don't care about any of the other things. The location is going to be -1 to display at the pop-up, otherwise the point. So we're going to need to do a little bit of this. I guess we should probably do it this way. To give us the actual point where this thing is going to be hovering. We don't care about max width, max height on navigate, or on hide. Alrighty. Cool. Wow, I can't believe that. Well, I guess it's a broken image. Image decode failed. Well, you can only do so much. What are the chances that there is one that small? But it's trying. It's trying so hard for things that are images. What's this one? That one's a little checkbox. That's handy. Those ones aren't images. So there we have our sample thing. We only went 15 minutes over. Hey, that's not too shabby. So let's go ahead and now again, this is specifying exactly what scope that this should be happening in, just for the sake of completeness. Check timeout. Well, let's say 2. We'll say this. scopes in which the plugin should be active. Checked against top level scopes. And this one should be time in seconds between modifications to check for data URIs. Okay, and we're going to say that that is a nice 2 seconds there. So we're going to say, whoops, check timeout is going to be 2 here as well. And then when we get to where did we actually do that? Down in the event handler. This shouldn't be this. This should be URI setting check timeout times 1,000. So print checking. Whoa, that's not right. There we go. So this is a scope where it is valid. 1, 2, nothing. That did not go as expected. Stop that, please. Thank you. Okay, every time it's modified, that should happen. So let's see. 1, 2. Oh, that's not where that's supposed to go. What a dupe. It should be trigger check. It should be down here. Debug code should be correct. Otherwise, things go horribly awry. Okay. Yeah, I know. 1, okay. 1, 2. Okay. We could set this to 3.2 seconds. And then when we make a change, 1, 2, 3, checking. Cool. That is configurable now. Go ahead and put that back. Doop. That is good. So we can get rid of that. And we can get rid of that. We probably want this to be more up here after that, so that that same problem does not happen again. That is all we have there. So we have a command to create a data URI and copy it to the clipboard. And we have an event listener which listens for modifications in files of a configured scope to see if there is any data URIs, outlines them to let you know that they're there. And then if you hover over one of those and it's an image, it will go. Now, theoretically, what we could actually make this even smarter by making this say that. Or something along those lines. And then it only needs to actually mark the things that actually match, although I haven't tested that against that regex, so we're not going to do it right here. And another thing that we could do is after the modification is triggered, give us the general, that would tell us, that a modification happened. We could say the cursor's roundabout here, where set some sort of threshold to look back, because we're using find all to find all of these things. But one of the things that we could pass, not with that one but with the standard find, is a start point. So instead of doing find all to find every possible data URI throughout the whole file, we can make this smarter in 2 ways. We could make it only look for the URIs that we know we're actually going to want to display a hover for. And instead of finding all of them everywhere, after a modification happens, then we take some, say, configurable value, look that many characters back, and then use view find to find the first one starting there, and then moving forward through the file. So if you had a 10,000 line file, it wouldn't need to regex the 10,000 lines. It could just be somewhere a little back a little bit from where you made the last edit, which would make that whole operation a little bit nicer, I would imagine. So, son of a poop. Sorry about that. That stupid source was not properly, you know, set to be hidden. Got to be careful about that. Oh, I see. Also, the scene transition is set to the wrong thing. Should have been set to fade. I switched myself through modes in OBS. So that is that we've finished the task for the evening. Plus extra things. We fixed HyperHelp so that help will focus at the top of the window. We made a plugin to create a data URI. We made a plugin to be able to preview a file, an image URI, assuming it's an image that Sublime knows how to display. And again, this could be made a little bit better. It could also do it everything inline. It could only be checking for actual data images instead of or image URIs instead of just all of them. It could be constraining where it's looking. There's a lot of extra smarts that could be done in here, but that was 2 hours and 22 minutes and 22 seconds. Wow, that was neat of stream. Some of that wasn't this, some of that was the stuff I did before. And we have a prototype plugin that's pretty close to there. It's even configurable. And as a matter of fact, we could even use package dev to make the package entries for, or the menu entries for configuring this thing and adding key bindings and all of that stuff. And that would only take a couple of minutes. And we're 90% of the way on a package like this, assuming one doesn't already exist. So hopefully this sort of thing is interesting to people other than myself. I'm just checking here to see that I could do a couple of, what could I do? What does this do? Nothing? Cool. That's what I was hoping. And that and that. I should have known that that wasn't working because of all of that stuff. So I guess we can say thanks so much for watching. I hope you found this semi-informative. How to create a plugin that looks for things in a file after changes have been made, after a period of time, mark those regions, be able to hover them, display an image. That whole thing at the beginning with sheets and figuring out the file name associated with one, even though it's not a view. It seems to be all kinds of interesting things. So, things you could do from here. Subscribe to my other channel if you would like to be on in the loop for the weekly videos that happen every Monday. That particular link will take you to that channel. It's also linked down in the description of this video. Every Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific time, a new video drops. Starting next week, the first video in the plugin development series is starting, which as a sneak peek is going to tell you how to get not how to set up Sublime and the things we're going to be needing and things of that nature. And then the next video after that in that series, we're going to be diving in. But we need to set a good base for this stuff. Other things you could do is subscribe to this channel if you'd like to see more streams like this. I stream every Tuesday at 8 p.m. PST here on the old tubes of you, which seems to be a big thing for a lot of people nowadays. I do this Sublime Text plugin and package development, sometimes working on my own packages. This particular stream, we were working on something that my good friend Keith thought would be a neat idea. And if you have a neat idea for something, you can drop it down in the comments section below any of the videos on either of the channels. You can also hop into the live streams and ask questions, any question about anything Sublime Text related. If you got a question and I have an answer, I will give you that answer. So there we have it. And I think that's pretty much all we have to say. I guess one last thing I could do is, if you have any of those ideas you don't want to drop them in the comment section below, you can also tweet me at OdatNurd and follow me there. I tweet whenever videos and live streams are happening. should one be interested in something along those lines? And with all of that said, I think it is time for me to move my mouse over to this position over here and say thank you so much for watching. Until the next live stream, this is OdatNurd asking you to please have a sublime day.